Before we begin, I want to know where you are listening from tonight. What country? What city? What time is it where you are right now? Drop a comment below with your location and the hour. I am always amazed by how many corners of the world tune in to hear these ancient stories. If you are new here, welcome to Echoes of the Ancients. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss our explorations into forgotten history. Tonight, we uncover something that changes everything you thought you knew about the Anunnaki. Every documentary calls them gods. Every ancient astronaut theory calls them creators. But what if they were neither? What if the beings who descended to Earth thousands of years ago were not conquerors or colonizers? What if they were refugees? What if the Anunnaki were not gods? What if they were survivors hiding in the shadows of our history? This question haunts the ancient texts when you read them with fresh eyes. The desperation in their actions, the urgency in their projects, the strange focus on rebuilding rather than creating from abundance. Tonight we trace the evidence that the Anunnaki came to Earth not from a position of strength, but from catastrophe. Not as masters of the universe, but as the last of their kind. The standard narrative is familiar by now. The Anunnaki descended from a planet called Nibiru. They came to Earth seeking gold. They created humanity as a labor force. They ruled as gods. This interpretation frames the Anunnaki as powerful beings in complete control of their destiny. Beings who chose to come here. Beings who had options and selected Earth from among them. But a closer reading of the Sumerian texts reveals behavior that contradicts this picture. The Anunnaki behave in ways that gods should not behave. They struggled. They worked to exhaustion. They fought among themselves. They made difficult decisions with apparent reluctance. They showed regret. Gods do not struggle. Gods do not tire. Gods do not regret. But survivors do. The behavior in the ancient accounts matches survivor psychology with uncomfortable precision. Consider the gold extraction that dominates the Anunnaki narrative. Why would divine beings need to mine anything? Why would immortals work until they collapsed? The younger Anunnaki, the Ejiji, refused to continue the grueling labor. They burned their tools in protest. They surrounded their leader's dwelling. This is not divine contentment. This is desperation. Why would a superior civilization depend so heavily on a single resource, unless that resource was not optional? Unless their survival depended on obtaining it. Every detail that seems strange through the lens of divine power makes sense through the lens of survival. The gods become refugees. The creators become the desperate. If the Anunnaki were survivors, the question becomes immediate. What did they survive? What catastrophe drove them from their home to seek refuge on Earth? Nibiru is described as having an unusual orbit, a long elliptical path that takes it through the solar system and then far beyond. A world that knew extreme cycles of heat and cold. Imagine living on a planet that spends centuries in frozen darkness as it moves away from the sun. Then, brief periods of intense radiation as it swings close. Such a world demands constant adaptation. Some interpretations suggest Nibiru's atmosphere was failing, that the gold they sought was needed to repair it. Particles suspended in the upper atmosphere, reflecting harmful radiation and retaining heat. If their world was dying slowly, They would have had time to plan, time to search for alternatives, time to identify Earth as a possible refuge with the resources they needed. But perhaps the catastrophe was not slow. Perhaps something sudden occurred, a near collision that disrupted their world, a war that made their planet uninhabitable, a technological disaster of their own making. The Anunnaki arrived with advanced knowledge, but seemed to struggle to apply it fully. They had capabilities, but appeared limited in implementation. This is the pattern of salvage. You bring what you can carry when you flee. You have knowledge, but not infrastructure. You remember how things worked, but cannot rebuild everything from scratch. Survivors with salvage technology would show exactly this pattern: grand knowledge, limited application, decline over time as what they brought wore out and could not be replaced. Refugee psychology has been studied extensively in modern times. Survivors of catastrophe behave in predictable patterns. The Anunnaki behavior matches these patterns remarkably. First, the desperate focus on specific resources. Refugees prioritize survival needs to the exclusion of everything else. The obsession with gold fits this pattern precisely. Second, internal conflict. Trauma survivors often turn on each other. The power struggles between Enlil and Enki, the recurring conflicts. These are trauma responses playing out over generations. Third, the compulsive need to recreate what was lost. Survivors attempt to rebuild their previous world in their new location. The effort to establish familiar structures and hierarchies on Earth. Fourth, the transmission of trauma to the next generation. Humanity's creation was not a gift, but a solution to a problem. We may carry Anunnaki desperation in our genetic design. Fifth, ambivalence toward the place of refuge. Refugees both need and resent their new home. The Anunnaki texts show this repeatedly. Earth was necessary, but never truly home. Sixth, the tendency to maintain separation. Survivors often remain apart from those who did not share their experience. The Anunnaki remained distinct from the humanity they created. Seventh, eventual withdrawal. When trauma becomes unbearable, survivors retreat. The gradual disappearance of the Anunnaki may represent this pattern completing itself. When you read the ancient accounts through this lens, the narrative transforms. Divine beings become recognizable. Their behavior becomes understandable. Their legacy becomes personal. The obsession with gold has always been the strangest element of the Anunnaki narrative. Gold is soft. Gold is heavy. Gold has limited practical applications. Why gold? The standard answer involves atmospheric repair. Gold particles in the upper atmosphere could reflect harmful radiation and retain heat. Planetary engineering to save a dying world. But consider the quantities described. Mining operations spanning thousands of years, global extraction efforts, the creation of an entire species to facilitate the work. Industrial-scale need. Gold conducts electricity efficiently. It resists corrosion completely. It reflects certain types of radiation. It has applications in technology we are only beginning to understand. If the Anunnaki were survivors of a catastrophe involving radiation or atmospheric failure, gold would be essential for survival technology. Not luxury, but necessity. The desperation of creating humanity as laborers makes sense in this context. They needed help they could not provide themselves. They were too few to extract what they needed to survive. We were not gifts of divine creativity. We were emergency measures implemented by beings fighting extinction. Our purpose was their survival. This is encoded in our very being. The restlessness that characterizes humanity, the drive to work beyond reasonable limits, the inability to be satisfied. Perhaps these are genetic echoes of why we were made. The flood narrative appears throughout ancient texts. The gods decided to destroy humanity. Then one of them warned a human to survive. What does this mean through the survivor lens? Survivors make terrible decisions when resources become scarce. If humanity had multiplied beyond what could be sustained, reduction would become necessary. Not judgment, resource management. This is brutal logic. When there is not enough for everyone, some must be eliminated. The decision to flood may have been survival mathematics rather than divine wrath. The disagreement among the Anunnaki reflects survivor conflict. Some saw necessity, others saw horror. The council debated. Not all agreed with the outcome. Enki's warning to Utnapishtim represents dissent. He valued what they had created. He refused to participate in destruction without resistance. He acted alone. The regret described after the flood is significant. The Anunnaki wept for what they had done. They had repeated a pattern, perhaps echoing what had happened to their own world. The covenant afterward, the promise never to flood again, represents recognition of error. They had acted from fear rather than wisdom. The survivors had become destroyers. This makes the narrative more human despite its divine framing. Desperate beings making desperate choices, regretting them afterward, trying to do better. The story of survivors everywhere. Survivors work with what they have. They salvage. They adapt. The Anunnaki civilization shows clear signs of salvage operation rather than fresh creation from unlimited resources. Their technology appears inconsistent. Some capabilities seem almost magical. Others seem limited. This is the pattern of salvage. You have what you escaped with, nothing more. The difficulty in training humans suggests incomplete knowledge. Full technological civilization would have better teaching methods. They taught what they remembered, not what they designed. The reliance on biological solutions, rather than mechanical ones, is significant. Creating humans rather than building robots. Genetic engineering rather than industrial manufacturing. Why work with biology instead of machines? Perhaps because machines could not be reproduced. Factories require infrastructure they no longer had. Genetic knowledge travels in minds. The gradual decline of Anunnaki presence fits salvage patterns. The technology wore out, the knowledge faded. Each generation had less capability than the one before. By the end of their active presence, the Anunnaki could no longer do what their ancestors had done. The transition from gods to legends reflects technological decline. The structures they built during their peak may represent efforts while capability remained, building durable while they still could, knowing it would not last forever. If the Anunnaki needed refuge, why Earth? The solar system contains many options. What made this planet suitable for survivors? Earth had atmosphere. Earth had water. Earth had the basic conditions for life that the Anunnaki could work with. Not every world offers these necessities. The presence of gold in accessible deposits may have been decisive. If gold was essential for survival technology, Earth's geology made it the logical choice. The existing biosphere meant they would not have to create everything from scratch. They could modify what existed rather than build from nothing. Efficiency for survivors with limited resources. The existing hominid population provided a template. Rather than creating life from nothing, they could modify what was already here. Faster, easier, possible with what they had. Perhaps they had no choice. Perhaps Earth was not the first option, but the only remaining one. Refugees do not always choose their destination. They take what they can reach. The division of territories when they arrived suggests coordinated evacuation. Sufficient numbers that organization was necessary. Not scattered flight, but planned withdrawal. But division also suggests limited resources. If they had unlimited power, they would not need to allocate. Division implies scarcity. Scarcity confirms refugee status. The creation of humanity takes on different meaning through the survivor lens. We were not created from abundance, but from necessity. Not as a gift, but as a crisis solution. The Ajiji rebellion forced the issue. They refused to continue exhausting labor. They could not be compelled. A solution had to be found, or the gold extraction would stop. Enki's proposal was elegant, if desperate. Take existing Earth primates, modify them with Anunnaki genetics, create beings capable of the work, but requiring less investment to produce. The choice to use existing hominids reflects salvage thinking. Work with what is available. Adapt rather than invent. The survivors' approach to problem solving. The long process of refinement described in the texts suggests trial and error, failed attempts, beings who could not function, gradual improvement, engineering under pressure. The emotional reactions when humanity was finally created are revealing. Relief rather than triumph. They had solved an immediate crisis, nothing more, nothing less. We were born from Anunnaki desperation. This is our heritage. The drive that makes humans work beyond reasonable limits may be memory of why we were made. But we became more than intended. The modifications that gave us usefulness also gave us awareness. We question, we create. We seek meaning beyond survival. We exceeded the design. The Anunnaki did not leave suddenly. They withdrew gradually over millennia. This pattern fits both survivor psychology and declining resources. As their technology failed and could not be replaced, their abilities diminished. Each generation could do less. The decline was visible to both them and humanity. Maintaining divine illusion became increasingly difficult. When you can no longer perform miracles, you must change your relationship with those who expected them. The shift from direct rule to priesthood intermediaries reflects this decline. They could no longer appear themselves. They worked through representatives who asked fewer questions. Eventually, even this became impossible. The last Anunnaki either died, left Earth, or went into hiding. The gods became legends. The survivors became myths. The pyramids and ziggurats may represent their final major efforts. Monuments built while they still could. Markers that would outlast their builders. The knowledge encoded in these structures was meant to survive them. Geometry, astronomy, mathematics. They left what they could in forms that would persist. This is the behavior of beings who know their time is ending. Preservation efforts, legacy projects, survivors ensuring something survives even if they do not. Survivors often try to warn others. They encode lessons learned through painful experience into stories and structures. The Anunnaki appear to have done exactly this. The myths describe cycles of destruction, floods, fires, catastrophes that recur. These may be warnings based on experience rather than prophecy. The knowledge they transmitted about astronomy was not academic. Understanding celestial cycles allows prediction. They knew what to watch for because they had seen it before. The emphasis on preparedness in ancient traditions may derive from Anunnaki teaching. Store grain, build strong, prepare for disaster. Advice from beings who had survived disaster. The sacred sites they established mark astronomical alignments. These may be warning systems. When certain alignments occur, certain events may follow. Calendars of catastrophe. The prohibition against certain technologies may reflect their caution. They knew what could go wrong. They tried to prevent repetition of their own mistakes. If they destroyed their own world through hubris, they would have reasons to limit what humanity could access. The forbidden fruit was forbidden because they knew what eating it cost them. We have not listened well.
God.
The technologies they warned against are precisely what we now pursue. Perhaps the warnings were never meant to prevent, only to ensure we could not claim ignorance. The megalithic structures attributed to the Anunnaki period carry survivor priorities in their design. These were not monuments to glory. They were functional installations. The durability of construction suggests beings who had experienced losing everything. They built to last because they knew that impermanent things get destroyed. The alignment with astronomical events was not decoration, but calibration. These structures tracked cycles that were significant because they had experienced what those cycles brought. The underground components of many ancient sites suggest preparation for surface catastrophe. If you have survived one disaster, you build shelter against the next. The global distribution of similar construction techniques suggests coordinated effort, survivors working together across the planet, preparing Earth for what they knew might come. The scale of some constructions seems excessive unless you understand survivor psychology. When you have lost everything once, you build bigger than necessary. You over-prepare. The acoustic properties of many structures may have served communication purposes. When advanced technology fails, you need alternatives. Sound travels when signals cannot. These structures may be emergency infrastructure, built for crisis they knew would eventually come. Waiting through millennia for the catastrophe that would require them. Modern genetics reveals anomalies that fit the survivor hypothesis. Human DNA contains mysteries that standard evolutionary theory does not fully explain. The human genome contains sequences that appear suddenly in the record. No clear ancestry, no gradual development, as if inserted rather than evolved. Human chromosome 2 is particularly interesting. Humans have 46 chromosomes. Our closest relatives have 48. 2 chromosomes appear to have merged. The merger looks deliberate rather than accidental. The telomere sequences that should mark chromosome ends appear in the middle, as if 2 were joined end to end. The rapid brain expansion in human evolution defies easy explanation. Brain size increased dramatically over a relatively short period. The energy cost should have been prohibitive. Large brains require significant calories. Hunter-gatherers typically cannot sustain the food supply necessary. Agriculture solved this, but agriculture came after the brain expansion. The timing suggests intervention. Something made large brains viable before the food supply existed to support them. The survivors needed intelligent workers. They created what they needed. We carry evidence of our engineering in every cell. The markers of modification persist in our genetics. We are not entirely natural. We are partly designed. If humanity was created by survivors, we may carry survivor psychology in our genetics. The characteristics that define humanity may be Anunnaki trauma encoded in DNA. The restlessness that never lets humans be satisfied. The constant striving for more. This may be survival drive passed down from beings who could never stop running. The tendency toward conflict, even when cooperation would serve better. This may be trauma response, inherited from beings whose conflicts may have destroyed their world. The inability to stop, even when enough has been achieved. This may be scarcity programming from beings who never had enough after their catastrophe. The fascination with apocalypse that pervades human culture. Every generation expects the end. This may be genetic memory of beings who experienced one end already. The drive to build monuments that outlast us. Pyramids, cathedrals, space programs. This may be inherited from beings who lost everything and were determined to leave something permanent. The ambivalent relationship with technology. We create what can destroy us. This may reflect Anunnaki legacy. They may have done the same thing to their world. Understanding ourselves as descendants of survivors changes self-perception. We are not fallen angels or risen apes. We are emergency measures created by beings fighting extinction. If the Anunnaki destroyed their own world through environmental damage or technological overreach, the parallel to modern humanity is uncomfortable. Climate change accelerates, resources deplete, conflicts multiply. The pattern that may have ended their civilization appears to be repeating on their adopted planet. Perhaps this is why the ancient warnings feel urgent. They recognized what was possible because they had done it. They tried to prevent repetition through encoded wisdom. The transhumanist drive to enhance humanity may echo Anunnaki psychology. When you cannot escape your world, you try to modify yourselves to survive its destruction. The space programs seeking to colonize other planets may reflect inherited understanding. When one world fails, you need another. They knew this because they lived it. The bunkers being built by wealthy individuals may represent survivor instinct surfacing. Some part of collective memory knows catastrophe is possible. Preparation seems prudent. If the Anunnaki failed to prevent their descendants from repeating their mistakes, their story is tragedy. Their warning went unheeded. The cycle continues. But survivors can break cycles. If we recognize the pattern, we can choose differently. Their legacy does not have to be doom. It can be warning, finally heeded. Legends speak of the Anunnaki returning, Nibiru approaching, the gods coming back. Through the survivor lens, what would return mean? If they left because resources were exhausted, return would require those resources to be replenished. What has changed? What would bring them back now? Perhaps return is not about coming back to Earth, but about Nibiru's orbital cycle. survivors checking on what they left behind during periodic approach. Perhaps some never left. Perhaps a remnant remained hidden, watching humanity develop. Survivors often leave observers, someone to maintain continuity. The question of whether Anunnaki descendants remain among humanity is intriguing. If they interbred with humans, their genetic legacy would persist in modern populations. Certain bloodlines claim descent from gods. Certain families maintain traditions older than documented history. These may be threads of heritage preserved across millennia. The return, if it happens, may not be dramatic. Not ships in the sky, but awakening of dormant genetics. Not invasion, but recognition. Descendants finding each other. Or perhaps the return is metaphorical. As humanity approaches Anunnaki capability, we become the return. We fulfill their legacy by matching their achievement. The gods are silent now. The Anunnaki no longer walk among us. What does survivor silence mean? Survivors often go quiet when they have done what they can. The energy required for constant activity depletes. Eventually, you must rest or die. They may simply be exhausted, or they watch in silence. Survivors who have made their warnings often step back. Will the warning be heeded? Will the pattern repeat? They wait to see. Perhaps the silence is technological. Their communication methods may have finally failed. The infrastructure that allowed contact may have degraded beyond repair. Perhaps the silence is choice. Having seen what happened on their world and fearing repetition, they may have decided distance is mercy. Let humanity find its own way. The silence may be protective. If catastrophe approaches and cannot be prevented, warning might cause panic rather than preparation. Sometimes silence is kindest. Or perhaps they are not silent. Perhaps we have simply stopped listening. The channels they use may require attention we no longer give. The messages may continue unheard. The silence invites us to act as if we are alone, to take responsibility for our own survival, to learn from what they left without depending on their return. If this interpretation is accurate, humanity inherits survivor's burden. We are the emergency solution created by beings at the end of their rope. This is not diminishment. Being created in crisis means we were made for resilience. Survivor genetics would favor adaptability, persistence, the ability to endure. The creativity that defines humanity may be survivor inheritance. When resources are limited, you must innovate. They survived by adapting. They made us in their image. The determination that pushes humans beyond reasonable limits may be survivor programming. Never stop. Never accept defeat. Keep going until you cannot. The compassion that appears even in harsh circumstances may reflect what they learned. After destroying once, they may have valued preservation. They may have coded care into our design. The hope that persists despite evidence may be essential survivor trait. Without hope, there is no point in continuing. They continued. They made us to continue. Understanding ourselves as survivors changes nothing about our capabilities. It changes everything about our context. We come from beings who refused to die. The question is what we do with this inheritance. Do we repeat their patterns, or do we learn from their experience and choose differently? The Sumerian tablets preserve memories of the Anunnaki in ways that support the survivor interpretation. The texts describe behaviors that make more sense for refugees than for gods. The Ajiji rebellion is recorded explicitly. The younger workers refused to continue. They destroyed their tools. They demanded change. This is labor uprising, not divine contentment. The council meetings described in the texts showed debate and disagreement. Votes were taken. Compromises were reached. This is how desperate committees work, not how omniscient beings decide. The creation of humanity is described as problem-solving, not generosity. A crisis existed. Solutions were proposed. The one that worked was implemented. Emergency engineering. The regret after the flood is documented. The Anunnaki wept. They questioned their decision. This is survivor guilt, not divine justice. They had done something terrible and knew it. The gradual withdrawal from human affairs is traceable through the texts. Presence becomes less frequent. Contact becomes indirect. Eventually, silence. The pattern of fading capability. The knowledge they left in the texts was practical. Agriculture, medicine, astronomy, law. These are survival skills. The curriculum of beings who wanted humanity to persist. Reading the tablets as refugee accounts rather than religious mythology reveals a coherent narrative. Desperate beings doing desperate things, trying to survive, trying to help others survive. The Anunnaki left astronomical knowledge that exceeds what primitive observation should allow. This knowledge makes sense if they brought it from a spacefaring civilization. They knew the planets of the solar system. They depicted them correctly in order from the sun. They knew of planets not visible to naked eyes. How, unless they had traveled among them? The precession of the equinoxes takes nearly 26,000 years to complete. They tracked this cycle. They recorded observations that would require millennia to compile independently, unless they inherited the data, unless someone who had already compiled it passed the knowledge along. Survivors with astronomical records sharing what they knew. The alignment of ancient structures to celestial events requires sophisticated calculation. Stonehenge, the pyramids, Angkor Wat. Each tracks cycles with precision, suggesting advanced understanding. Survivors who had experienced cosmic catastrophe would prioritize astronomical awareness. Understanding the sky means anticipating what might come from it. Early warning requires watching. The zodiac system appears in multiple cultures, suggesting common teaching. The division of the sky into 12 sections. The same system adapted locally, but sharing common origin. The calendar systems that emerged share structural similarities. Solar and lunar tracking, correction for drift, prediction of eclipses, common needs producing common solutions from common teaching. Flood narratives appear in virtually every culture on Earth. The details vary, but the structure remains consistent. This consistency demands explanation. The Sumerian account describes gods deciding to destroy humanity. One man was warned. He built a boat. He survived with his family and animals. Everything else was destroyed. The Hebrew account is nearly identical. Different names, same story. The Greek account adds elements but preserves the structure. Cultures with documented contact share similar narratives. But cultures with no contact also share the narrative. Native American traditions, Australian Aboriginal stories, Pacific Islander myths. The flood appears everywhere. This global distribution suggests either one event remembered globally, multiple local events generating similar stories, or common teaching from beings who had experienced flood before. Geological evidence indicates the end of the last ice age brought massive flooding. Sea levels rose hundreds of feet. Coastlines drowned. Populations would have experienced catastrophe. But the narratives are not merely about surviving flood. They are about warning, preparation, and selection. Someone knew what was coming. Someone ensured survival of specific individuals. Through the survivor lens, the flood narratives represent difficult decision. Resources were strained. The population had grown beyond sustainability. Reduction was chosen, then regretted. The concept of kingship descended from heaven appears in Sumerian texts explicitly. The first rulers were Anunnaki, or Anunnaki descended. Authority derived from divine right. This makes sense as survivor strategy. If you need populations to obey without understanding full context, divine sanction provides authority. Questioning the gods is forbidden. The king lists trace succession through impossibly long reigns, then through human-scale reigns. The transition marks the withdrawal of direct Anunnaki involvement. The concept of divine right persisted for millennia. Monarchs claimed descent from gods. They claimed special connection to the divine. They claimed authority beyond human question. This may represent survivor lineage. If the Anunnaki interbred with humans, their descendants would have advantages. Greater capability, perhaps. Longer lives. Inherited knowledge. The royal bloodlines that guarded their purity may have been preserving Anunnaki genetics. The prohibition on common marriage. The careful documentation of ancestry. Genetic management. The pharaohs of Egypt claimed divine descent explicitly. They were not merely rulers, but gods themselves. The elongated skulls in their art may represent actual physical difference. The secret societies that persisted through history may preserve survivor knowledge. The mysteries of Egypt, the initiatory traditions. Claims of ancient origin may be accurate. The technology attributed to the Anunnaki raises questions that the survivor interpretation helps answer. They had capabilities, but showed limits. Why? If they had arrived with full technological civilization, they could have done anything. But they struggled. They relied on biological solutions. They declined over time. Salvage Technology explains this pattern. You have what you escaped with. You cannot manufacture more. Every use depletes irreplaceable resources. Capability diminishes. The genetic engineering capability may have been their most portable technology, knowledge that travels in minds rather than machines. The ability to create workers when you cannot build them. The energy sources they used remain unclear. Whatever powered their initial capabilities eventually ran out. The pyramids may have served functions we no longer understand because the power is gone. The communication systems they used left traces in the structures they built. Acoustic properties, geometric alignments. These may have served purposes beyond what we recognize. The healing knowledge they possessed exceeded what humans later achieved independently. Medical texts describe procedures we are only now rediscovering. Survivor knowledge preserved and then forgotten. Technology does not last forever without maintenance infrastructure. The Anunnaki's decline reflects this reality. Even the most advanced salvage eventually fails if it cannot be repaired. If this interpretation is accurate, it presents a choice. Do we continue the patterns that may have destroyed them? Or do we learn from their example and break the cycle? The environmental parallels are obvious. If they damaged their world beyond repair, we are damaging ours. The same mistakes generating the same consequences across generations. The conflict patterns are recognizable. If their wars contributed to catastrophe, our wars could contribute to ours. The weapons exist. The tensions persist. The cycle threatens to repeat. The technological hubris is familiar. If they created what they could not control, we are doing the same. Artificial intelligence, genetic modification, powers we may not be wise enough to wield. But survivors also break cycles. The fact that they came here, that they created us, that they tried to leave warnings, suggests they wanted different outcomes. We have the same choice. We can acknowledge the inheritance and work with it. We can recognize the warnings and heed them. We can be the generation that finally learns. Or we can ignore it all, dismiss the ancient accounts as mythology, proceed as if we know better, and perhaps repeat what they did. Perhaps become the next survivors seeking refuge. The choice is real, even if the interpretation is uncertain. The patterns exist regardless of cause. Breaking destructive patterns serves survival, whether the Anunnaki were refugees or not. Let us draw together what we have traced tonight. The Anunnaki, read through the survivor lens, become different beings than the gods of popular imagination. They came to Earth not as conquerors, but as refugees. Not from a position of strength, but from catastrophe. Not with unlimited resources, but with salvage from a destroyed civilization. Their behavior matches survivor psychology. The desperate resource extraction, the internal conflicts, the need to recreate what was lost, the cycles of creation and destruction. The creation of humanity was not divine gift, but survival measure. We were made to help them continue. Our purpose was their survival. This is encoded in our very being. The knowledge they left was survivors' wisdom. Warnings based on experience, preparations for catastrophe they knew was possible, gifts that addressed vulnerabilities they had suffered. Their gradual withdrawal reflects inevitable decline. Each generation had less. Eventually, they could maintain presence no longer. The work passed to those they had created. The silence that followed was not abandonment, but exhaustion. Having done what they could, they retreated. The survivors had run as far as they could. The rest is up to us. We are their legacy, not servants of gods, but descendants of survivors. We carry their trauma and their determination. We continue their struggle, whether we know it or not. What does this mean for you personally, listening tonight wherever you are in the world? It means the restlessness you feel may be purpose rather than problem. The drive to keep going, to achieve more, to never be satisfied. This may be what you were designed for. It means the creativity you express may be inheritance rather than accident. The ability to adapt, to innovate, to solve problems with limited resources. Survivor capability in your genes. It means the hope you maintain despite difficulty may be essential rather than naive. The ability to continue when continuation seems impossible. The defining trait of survivors. It means the connections you form may be deeper than you realize. The bonds between humans may reflect our common origin, all of us created together, all carrying the same inheritance. It means the future is not determined. We are not locked into the patterns of those who came before. We can choose differently. We can learn from their experience without repeating it. The Anunnaki may have wondered the same things we wonder. Survivors often question the meaning of survival. What was preserved and why? What purpose remains? Perhaps the answer is simply to continue, to persist, to survive long enough to understand. They survived their catastrophe. They created us. We continue their survival. And perhaps, in continuing, we find meaning they could not. Perhaps the emergency solution becomes something more. Perhaps we transcend the purpose for which we were made. The cities attributed to Anunnaki establishment show survivor priorities in their design. These were not random settlements, but planned installations with specific functions. Eridu, the first city according to tradition, was built where fresh water met salt water, a liminal space, a place of transformation. Also a practical location with access to multiple resources. The temple at Eridu was called the House of the Aquifer. Water management was central from the beginning. Survivors from a world with failing systems would prioritize water above all else. Uruk became the great city of the goddess Inanna. Its walls were legendary. Its temples were massive. The scale suggests capability that later generations could not match. With its great ziggurat, served as administrative center. The records kept there documented trade across vast distances. Organization on a scale that suggests experienced administrators. Nippur was considered the spiritual center, the place where the fates were decreed. If the Anunnaki were coordinating global operations, they would need a central command. Lagash, Umma, Kish, Babylon. Each city had its function. Each was dedicated to specific Anunnaki figures. The division suggests organized settlement, not organic growth. The canal systems connecting these cities required engineering beyond what simple farmers could achieve. Water was controlled, directed, made to serve purposes across hundreds of miles. The walls around these cities were massive, defensive structures that suggest fear of attack. Survivors would build strong. They knew what could be lost. The ziggurats remain among the most mysterious structures of the ancient world. Step pyramids rising toward the sky. Temples at their summits. But temples for what purpose? Traditional interpretation says they brought worshippers closer to the gods. But the Anunnaki, if present, did not need humans to climb to them. They could descend when they chose. The ziggurat at rose 70 feet above the plain. Its core was solid mud brick. Its facing was fired brick, set in bitumen, built to last through millennia. The summit temples were small, intimate spaces, not gathering halls, but private chambers, places for individual contact rather than public ceremony. Some researchers suggest the ziggurats served as landing platforms. The flat tops would accommodate craft descending from the sky. The stepped sides would manage airflow. Others propose they were astronomical observatories. The height would provide clear sight lines. The alignment would track celestial events, warning systems for cosmic cycles. The ziggurats may have served communication functions. Height improves signal transmission. The survivors may have used them to coordinate across their scattered settlements. Whatever their purpose, the ziggurats represented massive investment. Resources poured into construction over generations. Survivors build what matters for survival. These mattered. The irrigation systems of ancient Mesopotamia transformed desert into garden. Without the Tigris and Euphrates, nothing could grow. With proper management, abundance was possible. The canal networks extended for hundreds of miles. Water was lifted, directed, measured, distributed. Each city had its allocation. Each field had its access. The technology required to build these systems exceeded what simple farming communities could develop independently. Someone taught the principles. Someone designed the networks. Water management requires long-term thinking. You must plan for floods. You must prepare for droughts. You must maintain infrastructure across generations. Survivors think this way. The legal codes devoted extensive attention to water rights. Disputes over irrigation could destroy communities. Clear rules were essential. Someone experienced in resource scarcity wrote those rules. The measurement systems used were sophisticated. Water was allocated by time and volume. Records were kept meticulously. This is bureaucratic management, not primitive farming. Salinization eventually destroyed much of what was built. Irrigation without proper drainage raises salt levels. The land that produced abundance became wasteland over centuries. Perhaps they knew this would happen. Perhaps they built systems that would eventually fail because immediate survival mattered more than long-term sustainability. Refugees make such choices. The metalworking of ancient Mesopotamia advanced rapidly from copper to bronze to iron. Each transition required knowledge that does not develop organically. Bronze requires tin. Tin is rare. The trade networks that brought tin to Mesopotamia spanned thousands of miles. Someone organized these networks. Someone knew where tin could be found. The alloy ratios for good bronze were established early and remained consistent. This is not trial and error. This is transferred knowledge. Someone already knew what worked. Gold working reached remarkable sophistication early. The royal tombs of Ur contained gold artifacts of extraordinary quality. Techniques that would take centuries to develop appeared suddenly. The lost wax casting method was known from the beginning. Complex shapes created through sophisticated process. Knowledge that implies long development but appears without antecedents. Ironworking came later, but also appeared with surprising completeness. The temperatures required, the techniques for removing impurities, the methods for hardening, all present early. If the Anunnaki were survivors with technological knowledge, metallurgy would be among their most valuable gifts. Metal tools make everything else possible. Metal weapons ensure survival. The decline in metallurgical quality over certain periods matches the pattern of declining Anunnaki presence. When the teachers withdrew, the students could not maintain the same standards. The law codes of ancient Mesopotamia appeared sophisticated from their earliest forms. Ur-Nammu, Hammurabi. These were not primitive attempts, but comprehensive legal frameworks. The principle of written law itself is significant. Rules recorded and publicly displayed. Accountability established. This is not how tribal societies naturally organize. Someone taught this. The social hierarchies encoded in the laws reflect survivor priorities. Clear ranks, clear responsibilities, clear consequences. Order maintained through explicit structure. Property rights were protected extensively. When you have lost everything once, you become particular about ownership. You create systems to prevent loss. The laws reflect this concern. Contract law was developed in detail. Agreements were written. Witnesses were required. Enforcement mechanisms existed. This is sophisticated commercial infrastructure. Family law covered inheritance, marriage, divorce, adoption. The rules were clear and comprehensive. Social stability requires predictable family structures. Survivors need stability. Criminal law established proportional responses. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The principle limits retaliation. Without limits, conflicts escalate. Those who have seen escalation write such limits. The legal traditions spread from Mesopotamia throughout the ancient world. The survivors' social technology propagating like their agricultural and astronomical knowledge. The Sumerian concept of the me describes the fundamental powers of civilization. Not divine attributes, but transferable capabilities, technologies of social organization. The me included kingship, priesthood, truth, descent to the underworld, sexual intercourse, music, writing, weapons. Each was discrete. Each could be possessed or transferred. This is not how divine powers typically work in mythology. The me were objects or knowledge that could be carried, stolen, given away. Inventory rather than essence. If the Anunnaki were survivors distributing salvaged capabilities, the me makes sense. Specific technologies allocated to specific purposes. Not divine powers, but survivor resources. The myth of Inanna obtaining the me from Enki describes negotiation and transfer. She gained specific capabilities by acquiring them from another. Power as accumulation rather than inherent nature. The portability of the me suggests data or devices. They could be moved on a boat. They could be pursued and potentially recovered. Physical or informational, not mystical. The loss of me could diminish a city or a god. Capabilities could be depleted. Resources could run out. This matches survivor reality better than theological abstraction. The concept of transferable civilization technologies persists in the idea that knowledge can be lost and found, that capabilities once possessed can slip away, that recovery requires effort. The Mesopotamian underworld was not simply afterlife. It was a realm with structure, governance, rules. The descriptions suggest something more concrete than spiritual abstraction. Ereshkigal ruled the underworld. It had 7 gates. Each gate required surrender of something valuable to pass. This is security protocol more than mythology. The descent narratives describe journeys through specific stages. Requirements were strict. Documentation was necessary. Authority had to be demonstrated at each checkpoint. This sounds less like spiritual afterlife and more like secure facility. Underground complex with controlled access, multiple verification points. What were they protecting? If the Anunnaki built underground facilities to survive surface catastrophe, these facilities would need strict access control. The underworld traditions may preserve memory of this infrastructure. The dead who went to the underworld were not tortured, but existed in shadow form. They ate dust. They sat in darkness. This could describe underground refuge conditions. The association of the underworld with death and darkness makes sense for underground facilities. Those inside survived, but at cost of normal life. shadow existence in protected darkness. Modern researchers have found extensive underground systems beneath ancient sites. Tunnels, chambers, water supplies. The infrastructure exists. The myths may describe its use. Inanna, called Ishtar in later traditions, stands out among the Anunnaki figures. Her narratives reveal a complex being with recognizable psychology. She was goddess of love and war, contradiction embodied. The combination makes sense for survivors. Love creates bonds that enable cooperation. War eliminates threats. Both serve survival. Her descent to the underworld and return describes death and resurrection. But the narrative includes specific details that suggest more than mythology. She prepared for the descent by gathering the me, the powers of civilization. She knew she would lose them. She went anyway. This is calculated risk, not spiritual journey. At each gate, she surrendered part of her power until she arrived naked and powerless. Ereshkigal killed her and hung her body on a hook. 3 days she remained dead. She was rescued through negotiation and substitution. Someone else had to take her place in the underworld. Her husband Dumuzi was chosen. He paid for her return. The narrative works as allegory of seasonal cycles, but it also works as account of accessing secure facilities, surrendering credentials at each checkpoint, facing judgment, barely escaping. Inanna represents something about survivor psychology, the willingness to risk everything, the understanding that power can be lost and regained, the complexity that catastrophe creates in beings. The patterns found in Mesopotamia appear worldwide in cultures with no documented contact. Sky beings who arrived before history, teachers who shared knowledge, beings who withdrew. In South America, Viracocha came from the sea after a great flood. He taught the people and then departed across the ocean. He promised to return. The pattern matches. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl descended as feathered serpent. He brought civilization, then left. His return was expected. The Spanish were initially mistaken for this return. In China, the sage emperors descended from heaven to teach humanity. They established civilization, then ascended again. Their wisdom persisted in the traditions they founded. In India, the Vedic tradition describes beings who came from elsewhere, taught sacred knowledge, and eventually departed. The knowledge they left shaped civilization for millennia. In Egypt, the Neteru were the first rulers, divine beings who established order before human dynasties began. Their wisdom was preserved in temples and transmitted through initiates. The consistency of the pattern across cultures demands explanation. Either one group of beings visited multiple locations, or the pattern describes something universal about early civilization. The survivor interpretation suggests the former, refugees from catastrophe spreading across the globe, establishing civilization wherever they settled, leaving when they could stay no longer. The archaeological record contains anomalies that standard explanations struggle to address. Sites that appear too sophisticated for their dating, technologies that seem out of place. Göbekli Tepe predates agriculture in the region by millennia. Massive carved pillars erected by people who supposedly lacked the organization for such projects. How? The site was deliberately buried, intentionally covered and abandoned. This suggests the builders were preserving something for the future, or hiding something from the present. Puma Punku in Bolivia shows precision stonework that modern tools struggle to replicate. Interlocking blocks with complex geometries, achieved supposedly without metal tools. The Antikythera mechanism, pulled from a shipwreck, computed astronomical positions with gear technology that would not appear again for 1,000 years. How did it exist? The Baghdad battery suggests electrochemical knowledge in ancient Mesopotamia. Vessels that could generate electric current. For what purpose, we do not know. The Nazca lines required perspective from the air to design. Shapes only visible from altitude. Created by people who supposedly could not fly, unless they could. Each anomaly can be explained individually through conventional means. Taken together, they suggest a pattern. Knowledge that existed, then was lost, then was slowly recovered. The Sumerian king list records reigns lasting tens of thousands of years before the flood. After the flood, reign lengths shortened dramatically. What changed? If the Anunnaki had extended lifespans, they would have experienced time differently. Patience measured in centuries, projects spanning what humans would call generations. Long-lived beings would plan differently. What seems impossible in a human lifetime becomes achievable across centuries. The Anunnaki could undertake projects humans could not conceive. The construction of megalithic monuments makes more sense if builders had centuries to complete them. No rush. No urgency beyond the immediate survival needs. Time as ally rather than enemy. The slow transfer of knowledge to humanity fits this timescale. Not everything at once, but gradual teaching. The patience of beings who know they will still be present generations hence. The frustration with humanity apparent in the texts may reflect time difference. Beings who had waited centuries for results, confronting a species that forgot yesterday's lessons. The decision to withdraw from human affairs may have been long deliberated, debate lasting generations, consensus building across centuries. Finally, action that seemed sudden to humans. If any Anunnaki survived to the present, they would have watched human civilization's entire arc, rise and fall of empires, repetition of patterns, history that to them is current events. Fire was essential technology that the Anunnaki controlled and eventually shared. The control of fire distinguishes humans from animals. But who taught us this control? The Prometheus myth describes fire being stolen from the gods and given to humanity. The punishment was eternal. Fire knowledge was protected, and its release was transgression. Fire enables technology. Metallurgy requires fire. Cooking requires fire. Warmth requires fire. Without fire, human civilization is impossible. The gift was foundational. But fire also destroys. Survivors of catastrophe involving fire would be ambivalent. The technology that saves also kills. The gift comes with danger. The Anunnaki's decision to share fire may have been practical. Humans could not serve their purposes without it. Cold workers are inefficient workers. Fire was necessity. The association of fire with the divine persisted for millennia. Sacred flames, eternal fires, the power given by beings who seemed like gods became itself sacred. The metallurgy that fire enabled gave humans capability the Anunnaki may have regretted sharing. Weapons, tools of destruction. The pattern that may have destroyed their world. Fire represents the ambivalence of all gifts from advanced beings, essential for progress, dangerous if misused. The receiver must prove worthy of the gift. The Anunnaki interest in human dreams appears throughout the texts. Diviners interpreted dreams. Messages came through sleep. What was this connection? Dreams may have served communication purposes. If the Anunnaki could influence human dreams, they could guide behavior without direct presence. Subtle management through the unconscious. The incubation practices, where seekers slept in temples to receive divine guidance, suggest deliberate contact. The temples facilitated communication. Sleep enabled the connection. Modern understanding includes the possibility of external influence on dreams. Electromagnetic stimulation can affect dream content. Technology could theoretically enable dream contact. The specific content of prophetic dreams often included practical guidance: where to build, when to plant, how to respond to threats. Useful information delivered through unusual channels. The interpretation of dreams became specialized profession. Priests trained in understanding the symbols. Knowledge of how to decode the messages preserved across generations. If the Anunnaki developed dream communication as they withdrew from direct contact, this would explain the tradition. Presence fading, but influence continuing through the sleep state. Tonight as you sleep, the same dreaming capacity connects you to whatever they understood about this state. The same consciousness they may have contacted reaches for dreams still. Music appeared in Sumerian culture as divine gift. The Anunnaki brought instruments and songs. Through the survivor lens, this makes practical sense. Music coordinates group activity. Work songs synchronize labor. March rhythms coordinate movement. If you need workers functioning together, music is a tool. Music preserves information. Before writing, songs carried history and instruction. Survivors would value this mnemonic technology. What is sung is remembered. Music alters emotional states. It can calm anxiety, inspire courage, create social bonding. Survivors managing traumatized populations would find music useful. The mathematical relationships in music, the ratios that create harmony, suggest understanding of acoustics. The physics of sound was not discovered, it was taught. The Sumerian mathematical system, base 60, remains embedded in our measurement of time and angles. 60 seconds in a minute. 360 degrees in a circle. Why base 60? It divides evenly by many numbers. Practical for commerce and construction. Sophisticated choice that suggests someone thought it through carefully. Mathematics allows prediction. Survivors who had been surprised by catastrophe would value forecasting. Numbers reveal patterns. Patterns enable preparation. Mathematics is survival tool. The healing knowledge attributed to the Anunnaki reveals survivor priorities. Medicine is essential for populations under stress. They would have brought what they knew. Sumerian medical text describes surgical procedures with surprising sophistication. Eye surgery, wound treatment, dental work. These are not primitive practices. The pharmacological traditions included hundreds of plant-based remedies. The knowledge of which plants treated which conditions implies long observation or inherited data. The healing goddess Gula was associated with dogs. Dogs can detect illness through scent. This connection may preserve memory of diagnostic capability. The incantations combined with medicine have been dismissed as superstition, but placebo effects are real. Perhaps they understood that belief enhances healing. The specialization of healing knowledge among different figures suggests division of medical expertise, different beings mastering different domains. Survivor specialization based on individual knowledge. The healing traditions pass to priests rather than common people. You share knowledge with those who will use it carefully. You protect what is valuable. Modern medicine rediscovers what ancient texts described: herbal remedies that work, surgical techniques that prove effective. What was dismissed as primitive sometimes proves advanced. All of this ancient history connects to your life in the present moment. The patterns described are not merely historical, they are ongoing. The technology we develop today mirrors what the Anunnaki may have developed: genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, climate modification. We approach their capabilities. The social structures we maintain echo what they established: hierarchies, specialization, written law, urban civilization. Their framework persists in our organization. The psychological patterns we express may be their legacy: restlessness, accumulation, monument building. The drives that characterize humanity may be inherited. The choices we face resemble the choices they faced: environmental limits, technological dangers, social conflicts. The same problems across vast spans of time. Understanding their story illuminates our story. We are not facing unprecedented challenges. We are continuing a pattern that began before recorded history. The warnings they left apply to us. The preparations they made may serve us. The wisdom they encoded remains available, if we recognize it, if we apply it. You are part of this continuation, whether you are aware of it or not. Your choices contribute to whether the pattern repeats or finally breaks. This is not pressure, it is context. Knowing where you come from helps you understand where you might go. Survivor heritage is not burden, it is resource. What did the Anunnaki dream about? Those who survived whatever destroyed their world. This question has no answer in the texts, but imagination can reach toward it. Survivors dream of what they lost, the landscapes that no longer exist, the faces of those who did not escape, the sounds of a world that went silent. These dreams would have haunted them. Did they dream of Nibiru as it once was, before whatever catastrophe made it uninhabitable? Did they wake on Earth and for a moment forget where they were? The displacement of refugees includes this psychological dimension. You are physically in the new place, but mentally still processing the old one. Present in body, past in mind. Perhaps this explains some of the melancholy that pervades the ancient accounts. Beings who achieved remarkable things on Earth, but could never fully belong here, always partially elsewhere. Their dreams may have informed their decisions, the determination to prevent repetition, the caution about certain technologies, the warnings encoded in what they taught. Dream wisdom from beings who had nightmares. We dream too. Perhaps some of our dreams carry echoes of theirs. The strange familiarity of places we have never seen, the recognition of faces we have never met, inherited memory surfacing in sleep. Survival carries a particular loneliness. Those who have experienced catastrophe are separated from those who have not by a gulf that cannot be fully bridged. The Anunnaki could not explain their experience to humanity. How do you describe a dying world to beings who have never imagined such things? How do you share grief that has no referent? This loneliness may have contributed to their distance, not arrogance, but isolation. The inability to connect fully with beings who could not understand the weight survivors carry. Humanity sensed this distance and interpreted it as divine remoteness. The gods were above us. But perhaps they were simply apart from us, separated by experience rather than nature. Survivors often find community with other survivors. Perhaps this explains the Anunnaki's internal bonds despite their conflicts. They shared what no one else could share. They remembered together. The loneliness of survival is also its burden. You continue, but you continue carrying what others do not see. The weight is invisible but constant. This may have exhausted them eventually. We inherit aspects of this loneliness, the sense that something is missing that we cannot name, the feeling of searching for home while standing in it, survivor displacement echoing through generations. Survival requires patience that non-survivors cannot fully appreciate. The willingness to wait through circumstances that seem unbearable. The ability to persist when persistence seems pointless. The Anunnaki demonstrated this patience across millennia. They worked on Earth for thousands of years, according to the accounts. They watched human generations rise and fall while they continued. This patience was not passive. It was active waiting, preparing, building, teaching, all while knowing that results might not come in any time frame they could predict. Modern humanity struggles with such patience. We want immediate results. We measure progress in quarters and fiscal years. The Anunnaki measured in centuries, perhaps millennia. Their patience may have been born from their experience. When you have survived catastrophe, you understand that recovery takes time. Rebuilding cannot be rushed. Healing happens at its own pace. The patience to let humanity develop, rather than forcing faster progress, reflects this understanding. Rushed development causes collapse. Sustainable growth requires time they knew how to give. We would benefit from inheriting more of this patience. The willingness to work toward outcomes we may not live to see. The ability to plant seeds whose fruits others will harvest. Knowing what the Anunnaki knew would have been burden as well as power. Understanding how civilizations collapse. Recognizing patterns that lead to destruction. Seeing history repeat. This knowledge may have been their heaviest inheritance from their own catastrophe. Not technology or capability, but understanding. The terrible clarity that comes from having witnessed the worst. They tried to share aspects of this knowledge through warning and prohibition. But how do you teach what can only be learned through experience? How do you transmit wisdom that words cannot fully carry? The frustration this must have caused is imaginable. Watching humanity develop the same dangerous capabilities, knowing where certain paths lead, unable to prevent the repetition they dreaded. Perhaps they hoped that encoding warnings would be enough, that future generations would understand what their ancestors could not, that wisdom would accumulate even if it could not be directly transferred. We have their warnings now. We have the patterns they tried to show us. We have the chance to demonstrate that their teaching was not wasted. Whether we will remains the open question. The weight of knowledge passes to us now. What we do with it determines whether their effort mattered, whether survival can lead to wisdom, whether cycles can actually be broken. The ancient accounts contain gaps, periods of silence, stretches where nothing is recorded. What happened in those spaces between documented events? Perhaps nothing happened. Perhaps those were periods of quiet work without drama worth recording. Survivors working steadily without the crises that generate stories. Perhaps the gaps represent lost records, documents that did not survive, knowledge that was not preserved. The incompleteness of what reaches us across millennia. Perhaps the gaps were deliberate, things that should not be recorded, events that those who knew chose not to transmit, protected silence rather than lost information. The spaces between invite imagination but resist confirmation. We can wonder what filled them but cannot know. This uncertainty is part of the inheritance. Perhaps the gaps are where the most important things happened. The quiet moments between crises, the ordinary days of extraordinary beings, the daily reality of survivor existence. We have gaps in our own histories, periods we do not record, events we do not preserve, the spaces between what we choose to remember. We understand gaps from the inside. Did the Anunnaki love? The texts describe conflict, cooperation, creation, destruction. But love, as we understand it, appears rarely, if at all. Perhaps their emotional range was different. Beings who had survived catastrophe might develop different emotional patterns: protection against loss, distance from attachment. Perhaps they loved in ways the texts do not capture. Private feelings not recorded in administrative documents or mythological accounts. Emotions that did not generate stories. The care they showed in creation suggests something. The patience with humanity's development. The regret after destruction. These are not the behaviors of beings incapable of connection. Perhaps their love was expressed through teaching, through the gifts of knowledge they left, through the warnings they encoded. Love as provision for the future rather than present emotion. We wonder about this because we wonder about ourselves. If we carry their inheritance, do we carry their capacity for love? Or does our love come from somewhere else, from what they added to what they found? The question has no clear answer, but asking it connects us to them in ways the texts cannot. We recognize ourselves wondering what they felt. The question itself is inheritance. What does it mean to create? The Anunnaki created humanity. We create in turn. Art, technology, ideas, children. The drive to bring new things into existence defines us both. For the Anunnaki, creation was practical necessity. They needed workers. They engineered what they needed. The purpose was survival, not expression. Yet creation exceeds its purpose. What they created became more than they intended. We exceeded the design. We developed capacities they may not have planned. Creativity that serves no survival function. Beauty that has no utility. Perhaps this excess is the nature of creation itself. What you bring into being takes on its own life, becomes more than the Creator's intention, exceeds the purpose that generated it. We experience this with our own creations, children who become themselves, not what we planned. art that reveals what we did not consciously intend, technology that develops beyond initial design. Creation is risk. You cannot fully control what you bring into existence. The Anunnaki learned this with humanity. We learn it with everything we make. The creative act includes surrender of control. This may be the deepest inheritance. Not specific capabilities, but the creative drive itself. The urge to bring new things into being, despite the uncertainty this creates. The willingness to make. Questions persist longer than answers. The questions the Anunnaki faced still face us. Where do we come from? What are we for? How should we live? Where are we going? They may have had answers we do not possess. Knowledge of origins we can only speculate about. Understanding of purpose we struggle to articulate. But having answers does not end questions. Questions return in new forms. Each generation must face them fresh. The answers of predecessors inform, but do not replace direct engagement. The questions remain alive because life continues. Perhaps this is what the Anunnaki ultimately left us, not answers, but the questions themselves. The persistent wondering that drives investigation, the refusal to accept easy closure. The questions we ask tonight are old, older than recorded history, perhaps older than humanity. Questions that whatever we came from was already asking. Questions that seem built into existence. Asking is itself meaningful, regardless of answers. The question connects the asker to all who asked before, creates continuity across the gaps that separate generations, makes inquiry itself inheritance. Let the questions settle for the moment. They will still be here when waking returns. Questions patient enough to have lasted millennia can wait through one more night. Sleep does not end wondering. Night was significant to the Anunnaki. They watched the stars with understanding we are only beginning to recover. They tracked cycles across centuries of darkness. They read the sky as text. This night connects to all those nights. The same stars, the same patterns, the same slow wheel of constellations across the dark. What they observed, we observe still. Night was when they worked undisturbed, when the sleeping humanity they had created did not require attention, when they could pursue their own purposes without oversight. Night was when they remembered, when the quiet allowed reflection on what they had lost, when distance from daily concerns permitted grief its space. Survivors often process loss at night. Night was when they planned, when the long view became possible, when the patience their survival required found expression in contemplation of outcomes generations away. This night, wherever you are, you participate in what they knew, the darkness that allows different seeing, the quiet that permits different thinking, the rest that enables continuation. Let the night do its ancient work, processing what day accumulated, healing what day damaged, integrating what day presented. The night has been doing this work since before humanity existed. Rest approaches now. The narrative has been traced, the questions have been raised, the ideas have been presented. What remains is integration, and integration requires release. The Anunnaki would have understood rest. Beings who worked across millennia would have valued recovery. The rhythm of effort and restoration would have been familiar to survivors. Rest is not cessation, it is different activity. The mind continues working while consciousness releases its grip. Dreams do what waking cannot. Rest accomplishes what effort misses. Let the ideas settle now. They do not require conscious attention to continue their work. They will find their levels, connect with what they match, establish themselves where they belong. The story does not end with sleep. It continues in whatever form sleep takes it. Perhaps dreams will carry pieces forward. Perhaps silence will do its own teaching. Perhaps rest itself is answer. The survivors would understand this trust. You cannot force integration. You cannot command understanding. You can only create conditions and wait. Patience with the process is part of the process. So let patience come now. Let the night receive what the night is suited to receive. Let rest accomplish what rest accomplishes. The continuation happens whether you consciously direct it or not. Wherever you are in the world right now, the night holds you. Different time zones, different circumstances, but the same darkness adapted to local conditions. Night is universal. The Anunnaki knew this universality. They spread across the planet. They experienced night in different locations. They understood that darkness connects what light divides. You are connected now to everyone else resting under night's cover. Different dreams, different circumstances, but the same surrender to what sleep offers. Rest is also universal. The questions we have traced tonight are shared questions. The inheritance we have discussed is shared inheritance. The survival we have considered is shared survival. We are in this together. Tomorrow will bring its demands. The world will require attention again. The practical concerns that sleep suspends will reassert themselves. This is the rhythm. This is how it works. But tonight, for now, the demands can wait. The attention can release. The practical concerns can rest. Tonight is for the deeper processing that urgency prevents. Let yourself be held by whatever holds you. The night, the bed, the quiet, the vast spans of time that connect this moment to all the moments that made it possible. Silence speaks when words cannot. The Anunnaki's eventual silence was not absence of communication, but communication through absence. What cannot be said can sometimes only be demonstrated. Their withdrawal said what remaining would have contradicted. Sometimes the message requires the departure of the messenger. Presence would have undermined what absence could teach. We understand this in human relationships. Sometimes the greatest love is expressed through letting go. Sometimes the deepest teaching happens after the teacher has left. The silence of the gods is not abandonment. It may be the final teaching. Figure it out yourselves. We have given you what we could. Now demonstrate that you learned. This interpretation transforms the silence from loss to gift. The empty space where they once stood is space for us to fill. Their absence creates room for our presence. Perhaps they watch the silence they created. Perhaps they wait to see what grows in the space they cleared. Perhaps the silence itself is the test. What do you do when no one is directing? We can answer that question with how we live. The silence continues. What we do within it is our response. Every day is reply to the question their departure posed. Choice may be the deepest inheritance. The Anunnaki made choices that shaped their fate. We make choices that shape ours. The capacity to choose connects us across whatever divides. They chose to flee their dying world. They chose to come to Earth. They chose to create humanity. They chose to withdraw. Each choice had consequences they had to live with. We face different choices, but the same structure. Action leads to outcome. Choice creates future. What we do now determines what comes after. This is universal law. The freedom to choose is also the burden of choice. We cannot escape the consequences of what we select. We cannot blame others for decisions we make ourselves. Perhaps this is what they most wanted us to understand. Not specific knowledge, but the reality of choice. The fact that what we do matters. The truth that we are responsible. The choices facing us now are consequential. Environmental decisions, technological decisions, social decisions. How we choose will determine what kind of future emerges. Their story shows that choices have outcomes. Some of those outcomes cannot be reversed. Some mistakes cannot be corrected. The time to choose wisely is before the choice is made. Why does anything continue? Why does existence persist rather than simply stop? The Anunnaki survived catastrophe. We survive our daily challenges. But why does survival happen at all? This may be the deepest question. Not who made us or why, but why continuation occurs. What is the drive that keeps pushing forward despite everything that pushes back? The Anunnaki embodied this drive. Against whatever destroyed their world, they continued. Against the exhaustion of their resources, they persisted. Something in them refused to stop. We carry this same drive. Against illness, against loss, against despair, we continue. Something in us refuses to stop, even when stopping might seem reasonable. The survival instinct persists. Perhaps continuation is simply what existence does. Perhaps asking why is like asking why water flows downhill. It is the nature of the thing. Existence continues because that is what existence is. Or perhaps continuation serves purposes we cannot see from inside it. Perhaps the drive to survive that the Anunnaki had and passed to us serves something larger. Perhaps we are part of a pattern we cannot perceive complete. These speculations exceed what can be known, but they point toward the mystery that underlies everything. Why anything rather than nothing? Why continuation rather than cessation? The questions beneath all questions. Time felt different to the Anunnaki. Their extended lifespans meant they experienced duration differently. What seems long to us may have seemed brief to them. What seems ancient to us may have been recent to them. This difference in temporal experience would have affected everything: their patience, their planning, their relationship to change. Time was a different medium for them than it is for us. We glimpse this difference in how children and adults experience time. A summer feels endless to a child. A decade passes quickly for an elder. Scale of experience changes the texture of duration. The Anunnaki's temporal scale would have made human history feel rapid. empires rising and falling like seasons, generations passing like days. The sweep of what seems vast to us feeling compact. Perhaps this is why their withdrawal was gradual by our measure, but sudden by theirs. What took millennia from human perspective may have been quick decision from theirs. Timescales are relative. We can barely imagine experiencing time this way. Our lives are brief by any measure. We plan in years, rarely in decades, almost never in centuries. Their temporal experience exceeds our imagination. Yet we inherit something of their relationship to time. The sense that there is more time than we can perceive. The intuition that what seems urgent may not be. The capacity to occasionally step back from immediate concerns. There are things we cannot know. The Anunnaki face limits too. Despite their capabilities, mysteries remained. Despite their experience, uncertainties persisted. Knowledge has boundaries. We want to know everything. The desire for complete understanding drives inquiry, but complete understanding may not be possible. Some questions may have no answers. Some mysteries may be permanent. This is not failure. It is the nature of existence. Finite beings cannot comprehend infinite reality. Partial perspectives cannot see the whole. The boundary of knowledge is not limitation to overcome, but reality to accept. The Anunnaki accepted boundaries we struggle with. They worked within limits rather than denying them. They accomplished what was possible rather than demanding the impossible. Wisdom includes acceptance. We can learn this acceptance, not passive resignation, but active engagement with what actually is, working with reality rather than against it, accomplishing what can be accomplished rather than failing at what cannot. The boundary of knowledge is also protection. Some things may be better not known. Some understanding may be dangerous. The limits we chafe against may exist for reasons we cannot perceive. Tonight we have explored what can be explored. We have traced what can be traced. What remains unknown remains unknown. This is not failure. This is honesty. This is the boundary we work within. Not knowing has its own gift. Certainty closes inquiry. Questions end when answers arrive. The mystery that frustrates also motivates. Not knowing keeps us searching. If we knew everything about the Anunnaki, the story would be closed. Complete knowledge would be complete ending. The gaps that frustrate also preserve possibility. Mystery maintains life. The Anunnaki may have understood this. Perhaps their incomplete teaching was deliberate. Perhaps they left gaps so we would have to fill them. Perhaps not knowing is part of what they gave us. Certainty creates stagnation. When all is known, nothing remains to discover. The sense that there is more, that understanding is incomplete, that the story continues, drives forward movement. We can receive this gift consciously. Not knowing is not failure to know. It is openness to what is not yet known. It is space for discovery that has not yet happened. It is future that remains unwritten. The questions we cannot answer keep us humble. Humility is accurate. We do not know everything. Acknowledging this positions us correctly in relation to what is. Pretending otherwise distorts. So let the not knowing be accepted. Let the mystery remain mysterious. Let the questions stay open. This is not defeat. This is the condition that makes continued inquiry possible. Night approaches in its own rhythm. The body knows when rest is needed. The mind knows when it has processed enough for one period. The natural limit asserts itself. We have traced a long narrative tonight, from catastrophe to creation, from creation to withdrawal, from withdrawal to inheritance, from inheritance to choice. The arc is complete for now. What comes next does not require planning. Sleep has its own intelligence. The unconscious knows what to do with what consciousness has received. Trust is appropriate here. The Anunnaki would have known this rhythm. Even beings with extended lifespans would have needed rest. Even survivors working across millennia would have paused to recover. Rest is universal. Let the pause come naturally. Let the narrative settle into whatever holds it. Let the questions find their places without forcing arrangement. Let the night do what night does. Morning will come with its demands. The world will require engagement again. But that is for then. This is for now. Now is for rest. Now is for the integration that happens below awareness. Wherever you are, whatever time it is there, the invitation to rest is present. The body already knows what the mind is still considering. Let the body's wisdom guide what happens next. The stars the Anunnaki watched still shine above us. Different constellations rise at different times, but the same stars persist. Light that left its source thousands of years ago arrives tonight. When they looked up from Earth, they saw reminders of where they came from. The sky was both origin and destination. The stars were both memory and possibility. Above contained their whole story. We look up at the same stars and see differently. For us, they are wonder, beauty, aspiration. We have not traveled among them. We do not remember what lies between them. Our relationship is different, yet the stars connect us to them. The same photons that entered their eyes enter ours. The same patterns they tracked, we can track. The sky is continuous with their time and ours. Perhaps they left markers we have not recognized, alignments we have not decoded, messages written in the positions of what endures. The sky as text we have not fully learned to read. The stars will outlast everything else. Long after humanity, whatever humanity becomes, the stars will continue. Whatever the Anunnaki were, the stars they knew persist. Continuity beyond all local endings. Tonight the stars wait overhead. Whether you see them or not, they are there. Whether you understand them or not, they contain what they contain. The sky keeps its counsel, regardless of who asks. The earth the Anunnaki landed on still supports us. The same ground, the same systems, the same living world they found when they arrived, transformed but continuous. They came to this planet because it could sustain them. We remain on it for the same reason. Our bodies are made of earth. Our food comes from earth. We are earth in self-aware form. The Anunnaki modified this world to serve their needs. We modify it to serve ours. The pattern continues. Perhaps this is what conscious beings do with their environments. Perhaps it cannot be otherwise. But modification has consequences. They may have learned this on their original world. We are learning it now. What we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. The connection is absolute. The earth is patient, but not infinitely so. Systems can absorb much, but eventually reach limits. What exceeds the limit does not simply fail, it transforms, sometimes catastrophically. We know this now. The warnings are clear. The science is settled. What remains is choice. The earth beneath us waits to see what we will choose. The consequences will follow our choosing. Tonight, the earth holds you. Gravity keeps you present. The ground beneath your dwelling supports your weight. The systems that sustain life continue their work, whether you attend to them or not. Breath connects all living things. The Anunnaki breathe the same air we breathe. Atmosphere circulates continuously. What they exhaled became what something else inhaled. The breath is shared. When they taught humanity, they breathed in the same space. When they withdrew, they stopped sharing breath with those they left behind. Presence and absence marked by breath. We breathe without thinking. The autonomic system handles it. But breathing is life. Without breath, everything stops. The thing we take most for granted is the thing most essential. Breath marks time. Inhale, exhale, inhale again. The rhythm is personal, but the pattern is universal. All that breathes participates in the same ancient exchange. Air moves through everything alive. Tonight, your breath continues without instruction. The body knows what to do. The rhythm persists. Let the breathing be noticed for a moment. This is what keeps you here. This is what maintains presence. The Anunnaki's breath has long since dispersed. What they exhaled has been recycled countless times. The atoms that pass through them have passed through much else since. Matter persists while forms change. Your breath participates in this continuity. What you inhale has been breathed before. What you exhale will be breathed again. The personal breath is part of the planetary breath. Connection is physical. Let everything settle now. The story that was told, the questions that were raised, the ideas that were presented. Let them find their places without effort to arrange them. Some things will stay, some will pass. What serves will remain accessible. What does not serve will fade. This sorting happens below conscious attention. Trust it to do its work. The Anunnaki story has been told for millennia in various forms. Tonight added one more telling. The story will continue beyond tonight in whatever forms it takes. Nothing said here ends it. What you carry forward is yours to determine. No requirement exists, no obligation binds. Take what helps, leave what does not. The narrative served its purpose in the telling. Tomorrow you will be the same person with one more experience integrated, not transformed, but informed, not converted, but considered. The story added itself to what was already there. This is enough, more than enough. The night has room for what was received. The quiet that approaches allows processing. What happened tonight will continue to happen in sleep. Let it happen. Let the process proceed. Let the night take what the night takes, and give what the night gives. You have done the conscious part. The rest happens otherwise. The distance between then and now collapses in certain moments. When we consider the Anunnaki, we reach across thousands of years, yet the questions they faced feel immediate. The gap narrows with attention. They struggled with survival. We struggle with survival. They faced choices about technology. We face choices about technology. They dealt with consequences of their decisions. We deal with consequences of ours. The parallel is not coincidence. It is inheritance. We carry forward what they began. We work within the systems they established. We face what they faced because we came from them. This connection across time is itself meaningful. It means we are not alone in our struggles. Others have been here before. Others have faced similar. The path has been walked, even if not completely mapped. Let this connection be felt now, not as burden, but as companionship. The past walks with us. What survived to create us survives within us. We are never entirely alone. The hour grows late. The stars wheel overhead as they wheeled when the Anunnaki first arrived. The same patterns, the same cycles, the same silent observation. Wherever you are listening from, the night extends its invitation. Rest comes for those who accept it. The questions can wait. The answers are not urgent tonight. Let what you have heard settle into whatever depth receives it. Sleep processes what waking cannot. Dreams may carry pieces forward. Morning will bring opportunity to engage again. This has been Echoes of the Ancients. Thank you for listening tonight. Subscribe for more explorations into forgotten history. Leave a comment with your location and the hour. The Anunnaki were not gods, they were survivors. And now, having heard their story, so are you. Good night.